It's that time of year again. World leaders and chief executives are descending on the snowy resort of Davos for the annual World Economic Forum to discuss the year's most important political, economic and social issues. But as previous years have shown, Davos is also about the gatherings and parties in town away from the Congress Centre. Indeed, for many, high-level networking is as much of a draw as the formal debates inside the halls. So, what can we expect to be on the agenda in Davos this year?
The discrepancy between growth in America and near deflation in Europe, the slowdown in China, and what happens in Japan, and above all, whether Europe can rescue itself from deflation and whether the European Central Bank has done enough when it makes its likely move to introduce quantitative easing, buying up a massive amount of bonds, we don't know how much. But also in the background will be, well, that American recovery looks pretty good. People who are writing off America several years ago look rather foolish. So in a way, the sort of old order will be coming back into view. But I think, above all, a lot of eyes on Europe.
With still weak global growth and the spectre of deflation haunting Europe, but better prospects in the US, the divergent world economy will be the focus of much debate.
The question is what sort of growth pattern we're going to get, because now we're seeing some really serious divergence in the world, particularly with the US and UK to a lesser degree looking good, Europe really still in terrible trouble, Japan uncertain, and China, though still growing much faster, also uncertain. So this divergence and the uncertainty around the divergence will, I think, be also a big theme. Probably the most important realization, which I think must now be there, is that we're not going to go back to a world that looks anything like either the world before the big crisis of 2007-8 onwards, or even the high commodity price world of two years or so ago. China also has fundamentally changed. We are actually now in a very different world situation economically and therefore necessarily also politically from the one we thought we might be in even a few years ago.
But Davos covers more than economics. After a year that's been dominated by the Ukraine crisis and the rise of ISIS, geopolitical issues will be also under consideration. Many world leaders will have the chance to set out their stalls and mingle with delegates. Those who don't appear will be conspicuous by their absence.
I think the big geopolitical issues are Russia, the Middle East, and now terrorism after the attacks in Paris. But I think one that Davos is particularly kind of concerned with is Russia, because Russia was a major part of the world economy, depending on how you measured, 8th or 5th largest economy in the world. The Russians have always been a big presence at Davos. In a way, their arrival there after the Cold War was a sign that there was now a global capitalist system they were part of. And one of the things I'll be watching to see is, have Russia's really been chucked out of the club now, or are they still in some funny way, at least through business, part of the club? I think that'll be very, very important, because Davos was an important locus for Russian-Western interaction. World leaders have many opportunities to bump into each other, whether it's at the United Nations or at G20 summits or whatever, but Davos is slightly unusual in the sense that it's easier to have informal meetings. Everyone's kind of scattered around town in different hotels, and so I think a lot does go on behind the scenes. Sometimes it's leaders to leaders, but it's also actually an opportunity for world leaders to talk to big businessmen who they're less likely to bump into in the normal course of things. And it's also a place where you see the kind of formation of an elite consensus. You see who's in and who's out. So this year, for example, you won't see Vladimir Putin, who's been a big figure at Davos in the past. I'd be very surprised if he showed up this year. However, one of the people who is scheduled to turn up is the new president of Egypt, General El-Sisi. And if he gets a warm reception at Davos, which I suspect he will, it will in a sense be a sign that the international community is unofficially endorsing the coup in Egypt and saying they're happy with the way that events have turned out there, or at least accepting it.
The big question for the vast majority of people not off to Switzerland this week is, why should I care?
You're still going to have several hundred of the top business leaders from around the world, a lot of people from Europe, America too, some from Silicon Valley, developing countries. Countries you don't often hear a lot about, like Azerbaijan, will be represented. And I think there's still plenty of debate. And of course, above all, it's all about networking.